There is no honorable way to kill, no gentle way to destroy. There is nothing good in war, except its ending. 3 months ago, President Biden proclaimed that American troops would leave Afghanistan. Now, the unconditional parting is nearly complete. The exit from Bagram Air Base, which sits at an hour's drive from Kabul, marks the end of one of America's forever wars. For Afghans, however, the narrative is different. The conflict is still going strong. If anything, it's going to get worse than before. With no American support, the Afghan army is already folding under pressure. Meanwhile, the Taliban are sweeping across the country, taking district after district. Some 38 million Afghans are now left to a grim fate, while the government stares at the abyss. It is unmistakable. Security is not a product, but a process. I'm your host Shirvan and welcome to Caspian Report. Today's video is sponsored by Brilliant, which is an online learning platform for STEM topics. The neat thing is that Brilliant has a system that starts with one small commitment to learning and then builds up to long-term growth. Personally, I enjoy the algorithm course because I employ algorithms in my daily activities, particularly on YouTube, so it makes sense for me to learn as much as possible. The way Brilliant makes the courses is storytelling based. Instead of just watching a video, you actively participate through puzzles. These come in all shapes and sizes, but each emphasizes critical and reasoning skills to resolve unfamiliar problems. So you're learning to understand and not just memorize things. To support Caspian Report and discover more about Brilliant, go to brilliant.org/CaspianReport and sign up for free. The first 200 people to sign up using that link will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. America has fought in Afghanistan for nearly 20 years. It has lost more than 2,300 troops and it spent over $2 trillion on the war effort. Yet, for all its wealth and military might, Washington failed to defeat the Taliban. Likewise, it also failed to create a strong, self-sufficient Afghan state. The lives of ordinary Afghans are now more insecure than before. In 2020, the number of civilian casualties was almost 30% higher than in 2001 when the American deployment began. Moreover, the Afghan economy is no bigger than it was a decade ago. In other words, the country is back at square one. Now, admittedly, America was never going to solve all of Afghanistan's troubles. For policymakers in Washington, continuing the fight in Afghanistan has become politically detrimental. While the initial decision to go to war was supported by nearly 90% of the American public, less than 1/4 opposes the current retreat. Being a global power means that America has more pressing priorities, namely in places like Russia and China. Now that the die is cast, America's abandoning of Afghanistan will hurt its long-term credibility as much as the Vietnam disaster. While rivals like China and Russia will take note of the departure as a sign of weakness, American allies around the globe will assess the decay of the Afghan government as a measurement for American commitment in their respective regions. But however much the decision might hurt Washington's credibility, the exit strategy spells catastrophe for the people of Afghanistan. Ashraf Ghani, the president of Afghanistan, had been negotiating a peace accord with the Taliban whereby the latter would lay down their arms and partake in a newly designed political system. In theory, the presence of American troops placed pressure on the Taliban to accept a form of power-sharing agreement. That may sound like a terrible plan, but considering the daily aspects of Afghan power politics, legalizing the Taliban as a political party was the only feasible resolution to end decades of violence. Now, the negotiations are out the window. With the Americans gone, a new power vacuum is emerging in Afghanistan. The Taliban are using their victories on the battlefield to topple the Kabul government by force. The situation on the ground is changing at a breakneck pace. Afghan troops are faltering as the Taliban fighters come rumbling back. Since May 2021, the Taliban has seized dozens of districts with minimal fighting. Demoralized Afghan forces have been fleeing in packs, while local power brokers have negotiated surrenders with the insurgents. Even in North Afghanistan, traditionally a steadfast enclave against Taliban forces, large swaths of territory were yielded as thousands of Afghan soldiers fled across the border with Tajikistan. Confidence in the Kabul government is thinning swiftly. Now, part of the reason why the Afghan National Army is failing is due to its corrupt apparatus. A large part of its fighting force consists of ghost soldiers, made up of recruits meant to inflate available funds. For those soldiers that do exist, it is not uncommon to go without pay for months. What's more, many Afghan military outposts are left without basic supplies and cut off from reinforcements, while air support has ceased with the exit of the Americans. All in all, the Taliban's rapid advances have exposed the myth of Afghan combat readiness. As things stand now, Taliban insurgents have gained control over 3/4 of the country. Although many of the Taliban-occupied territories are in the countryside, they've also gained control over essential border crossings with Iran and Tajikistan. The only places still holding out against the Taliban are the major cities and the Central Highlands, the latter being home to the Hazara people, who are an ethnic minority of Turkic, Persian, and Mongolian ancestry. President Ghani insists that the territorial losses will be reversed. But at the pace things are going, some American intelligence agencies suggest that the Afghan government may collapse within 6 months. Either way, day-to-day violence is snowballing. Afghans are hanging on by a thread, their grief almost tangible under the skin. Many are increasingly opting to leave the country, a decision that is not taken lightly. Some 600,000 Afghans have fled the country in the last 18 months. Many headed towards Iran and Turkey. The arrival of refugee caravans has reignited discourse on the state of asylum seekers, particularly in Turkey and possibly in Europe in the near future. For the Afghans that do stay put, the outlook seems increasingly desperate. The Kabul government is working to mobilize local militias to shore up the national army. Doing so would give the government some breathing room and allow it to regroup its forces. Desperate times call for desperate measures. However, back in the 1990s, the last time when Afghan warlords and private armies took up arms, anarchy consumed the country. The militias turned on each other and the public because they were raised along ethnic lines. Warlords started purging political and business opponents and got away with it by claiming that they were members of the Taliban. Mass atrocities were committed in the process, and the mayhem was so dreadful that Afghan society never recovered from the shock of the 1990s. The plan to revive those warlords could bring back more of the same. Extrajudicial killings will surge. From an international prism, spillover is to be expected. While the United States may have the luxury of retreating thousands of kilometers away, the regional powers do not. Pakistan is eyeing the Taliban's momentum and fears that the Afghan Taliban could swing back at Pakistan, particularly its ethnic Pashtun inhabited regions. This is noteworthy because the bulk of the Taliban fighters are ethnic Pashtuns. The insurgency could take on an irredentist program that targets the territorial integrity of Pakistan. Meanwhile, Russia has security obligations in Central Asia. The risks of ethnically driven violence, the Afghan narcotics trade, and the proliferation of religious extremism are driving the Russians to redouble their commitments to Central Asia. In Tajikistan, for instance, an additional 20,000 troops are stationed along the border with Afghanistan. At the same time, Beijing shares similar fears of instability seeping into its Xinjiang province, where China may have detained up to 1.5 million people, mostly ethnic Uyghurs. Now, although most regional countries are in agreement to prevent instability, there is no consensus on which terms. As such, each powerhouse is trying to establish bilateral ties with the Taliban leadership with the aim to assure stability according to their own interests. In substance, the power vacuum left by Washington is enormous. But no regional power wants to deploy troops in Afghanistan, not unless the localized violence threatens regional security. If this implies striking bilateral deals with a Taliban-dominated Afghanistan, so be it. However, none of this means that the collapse of the Afghan government or the disintegration of Afghanistan is close at hand. This integration, after all, implies unpredictability. What will happen to the Afghan government is difficult to calculate. The Taliban lacks the heavy weaponry needed for full-out assaults, so it may prefer stitching up the countryside to pressure the urban areas. It's now a waiting game for the government to buckle. As time works against it, Kabul will want to patch up a new international response consisting of players like Pakistan, Turkey, Iran, India, Qatar, China, and Russia. But none will be looking to step into the graveyard of empires. There are too many precedents that have gone terribly wrong. By its very nature, Afghanistan is like a suitcase without a handle. It's too precious to give away and too clumsy to carry around. I've been your host Shirvan from Caspian Report. If you approve of our work, please consider supporting us through our Patreon platform. The link for it will be in the description. Thank you for watching and Sahol.